From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo, your daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Thursday, May 23rd. I'm Erin O'Toole. Okay, if I say the phrase gardening season, what comes to mind? You might picture big beds of colorful wildflowers, row after row of neatly staked tomato plants, maybe big bags of mulch stacked up against the side of the house. Or maybe that's not what you picture at all. Not all of us are ambitious master gardeners, if we even have gardening experience at all. A lot of us do our gardening on a more modest canvas. My colleague Natalie Skoland knows that feeling. She's a KUNC journalist who recently set out to write an introduction to gardening for novices. And she lives in an apartment, so she also talked about the benefits of starting small as you work on your green thumb. I love Natalie's tips, so I asked her to share some of them with us today on In The NoCo. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Erin, thanks for having me.
So before we get going here, you live in an apartment, so I know your options are a bit limited, but do you consider yourself a novice gardener, or do you have a brown thumb like I do?
It is a little bit of both. I have had some small successes in the past. You know, I cultivated a succulent in a former apartment and saw that flourish, and have also had a beautiful basil plant before, but I've mostly done potted plants and more recently had kind of an unfortunate downturn with one of my basil plants, and so it's been kind of up and down.
Well, it sounds like we're on the right track here, though, because for people who only have a porch or maybe just a windowsill to work with, potted plants are the way to take a small step into gardening. What did you learn from your experiences about setting up a potted plant for success?
Yeah, so it's actually harder to cultivate potted plants than it is to grow them in the ground. Plants naturally grow in nature in soil, and can put their roots deep. But, potted plants take a little bit more care and attention, a little bit more watering. You also want to really think about temperature extremes. One interesting thing I learned from experts I talked to was that plant roots have evolved to be deep underground. And so they are not as used to temperature swings as maybe the top of a plant that you can see in your garden. But when it's in a pot, the roots, are more exposed to the temperatures. You might have it on a windowsill, you might have it out on your porch. One tip is actually to collect dead leaves from the fall that you might have around your yard, or if you don't have a yard, in your apartment complex, maybe you find them.
Sure.
And so you can put them in a plastic garbage bag and then wrap that around the pot, and it actually helps provide an extra layer of insulation for the plant with these colder temperatures. It may not be a catch-all, but it is an interesting tip you might try. Also, just consider the fact that, if you're going to plant plants in a pot on a porch, for example, it might get a ton of sun on that porch, and it might also be a cement porch or something that's going to absorb a lot of heat.
Yeah.
So definitely considering the needs of exactly where you're going to put the plant, or if it's a very shaded part of your home or your porch. It might be a slightly different plant choice than someone who has a larger garden.
Okay, Natalie, you alluded to an incident with a basil plant that you bought in the grocery store. After you bought it, it kind of went downhill from there. What happened and what lesson did you learn from that?
Yeah, so this past fall, I was at the grocery store buying some ingredients for a meal I was going to cook, and, it called for basil. So the grocery store was also selling the basil plants themselves, as you'll often see.
Sure.
Me and my excitement, I decided, why not? I'll buy the whole plant and regenerate.
Yeah.
I've done it before. I've seen success. I thought I could do it. So I brought this plant home, put it in a pot, but I didn't really repot it or put in new soil. And something I've learned, again, from talking to experts is that it's very important to choose a healthy, nutritious potting soil when you're going to put plants in a pot, just because they're already more vulnerable. So I left it in the same soil it had been in, and it survived for, a little bit. But as it got colder, it was on a windowsill. I think that also impacted it. The leaves started to turn yellow. It was sad to see. It didn't really regenerate as many leaves as I thought it might.
I actually had a similar experience with my own basil plant from the store. I still feel guilty to this day about it.
Same, I do too.
Pour one out for our basil. So Colorado and the Front Range have a dry climate. One of the main tips that I hear a lot is to plant drought-tolerant varieties. Does that mean using native plants from Colorado is the way to go?
So this was something I found really interesting as I was talking to folks. Native plants are great. And the reason they're great a lot of times is because they are adapted to this specific climate and the environment. This is where they're meant to grow. So it makes sense that they would be a good pick, but they aren't the only ones that you can choose from when you're trying to decide. And that's because actually there are other parts of the world that also have, in this case, high desert climates. And so they're kind of similar to what we find along different parts of the Front Range, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey. So I talked to Michael Bronner, the owner of Harlequin's Gardens. It's a sustainable nursery in Boulder. And he said that a lot of these parts of the Middle East actually have plants that do really well here too. And so he also said nature loves diversity. So, definitely encouraged to choose a variety of plants when you're making your picks.
Well, Natalie, this is your first summer in your new apartment. Congratulations, first of all. I'm wondering what small gardening victory you are hoping for in the months ahead.
I think with whatever next plant I attempt, likely in a pot as well, because I'm in an apartment, I hope that I can, see it sprout. If I start from a seed, see it peek its head above the soil, and maybe try not to be too hard on myself if it doesn't, grow into a whole tree or whatever it may be, but take it one step at a time and just to get to see the little things and enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for being here and talking about this today.
Thank you, Erin.
Natalie Skoland is a KUNC journalist. She told us one more simple tip. Only put plants in pots that have a hole in the bottom so extra water can drain out and oxygen can circulate properly. You'll find a link to her post on gardening tips in the show notes for today's episode, just in time if you're in the mood for doing some gardening over the long Memorial Day weekend. And listeners, we want to hear from you. We make In The NoCo for you. We've covered everything from a new medical school in our region to mountain communities reducing light pollution for a clear view of the night sky to simple gardening tips like in this episode. What do you want to hear more of or less of? Send your feedback to noco@kunc.org. That's NOCO@kunc.org. That's it for us today here on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in northern Colorado.